Awesome. So as Lucy mentioned, these are tales from the trenches. So just a few quick things that I wanted to talk about from 4.2, things that have come up at customer sites, and go over them here. Most of them will, actually all of them will work the same in 4.3. So it could be handled either way, but the presentation is going to be in 4.2. All right, the first one that I wanted to talk about is how to calculate a weighted average. So this came up, a customer asked for this. And so we don't have a weighted average object or function in Webi. So I wanted to take a look and see how Excel was doing it. In fact, the customer had given me an Excel spreadsheet to show this is what I want, the end result. And so I looked it up. This is just a quick little example that kind of shows it with grades. So each grade here for a particular student has a different weight. So the assignments are worth so many points. The midterm is worth more. The project is worth a little more, and the final exam is worth the most. Okay, so how can that be calculated and show a weighted average for that final grade? And in Excel, they have this sum product function. And if I double click on that to highlight, there we go. So basically, it's taking the sum of the grade and the weight, multiplying them together, and then dividing it by the weight. Okay, so once I saw that, I thought, well, we can do that in Webi, right? So let me show you that here. We have the same data here. We've got our grade and our weight. Excuse me. The first thing I'm going to do is add a column to the right to multiply our grade times the weight. There's my grade times the weight. All right, I'll save that as a variable, which I'll call grade weight. Or weighted grade, I could have called it. So I'm going to add a sum to this, just actually, if we add more calculations here for an average. So just a straight average is going to give me 86.88, which is not the weighted average. For the weighted average, I want to be able to use this multiplied grade weight times the sum of my weight. Okay, so if I create a new cell here, one sec there. This is the calculation we're gonna do, our grade weight divided by the sum of our weight. So I'll do the sum of my variable for grade weight divided by the sum of the weight. And that gives me my 83.6, which is exactly what we showed here in Excel as well, the 83.6. So that would be the student's grade. So the same principles can be applied to get any weighted average for your dimensions and measures, okay? So here in this scenario, the grade could be one of your measures. The weight would be another measure. Multiply those two measures together to get the combination, and then divide by the weight to get your weighted average. Okay, so there you have it. An easy way to get a weighted average in Webi. All right, the next example that I'm going to show is another calculation context example that came up. So this is a small data set, and I'm going to copy it here just so you can, we're going to break it down a little bit so you can see what's going on here. They didn't want to show all this data. They really wanted a little bit more of a simplified view. So just the customer ID, category, and product. And then they wanted to see an average response time. But they wanted the average response time to be based on the particular marketing campaign that they had going on for that. So just a simple average for that. Doesn't quite do what we want. Of course, that without any other dimensions in there, it just is going to give us the same as a sum in there. They wanted to see the average based on, so for each marketing campaign. So in this case, I'll add the marketing account ID and close that. So that was partway there. However, it still isn't giving us the correct values. For example, if we look at this line here for the oil change here, let me add some breaks to the data so you can see a little bit better what's going on. Here, for the oil change, there's 2 lines here. And so the average between these two would be the 1,252 milliseconds. However, because we're doing the average based on the account ID, marketing campaign ID, and it's the same, we get the exact, it's actually just summing it for us. We're not getting the breakdown. So the further breakdown would be if we added the marquee group in here, which is giving us this extra line in here. So if we add that into the calculation context, by seeing it laid out like that, you can see what is the extra values that are giving those additional lines, and then that helps you know what to include in your calculation context. So now for my oil change here, now it gives me a proper average for the marketing campaign that they're looking for. Another way that we could have done that, of course, in Webi, there's so many ways to achieve the same results. If we break down the average, so say instead of using the average function, we took the sum of our response time divided by the count of the campaigns. That would be another way of achieving this calculation. So if I type, give me the sum of response time divided by the count of my marketing. And if I stopped there, you would see, again, I'm not getting the right calculation because account by default in Webi is going to give us distinct. So in this case, it's seeing that as a distinct count. Same scenario for this first one here as well. It's not giving us a distinct. However, if we just add the additional parameter of all in there, now that gives us the correct count, and you can see compared to the other, both calculations, even though they're different, are giving us the same results, and they're the correct results. All right, so just wanted to point that out, and also the troubleshooting, the way I would lay out the data in order to see what's going on, to know what needs to be included in my calculation context. All right. The next example, these were from 2 different customers. I'm going to start off with this example first. So the need in this case was for filtering the data for certain vendor numbers. here. Okay. So my formula was going to be if the vendor number is in list, and then to make sure I'm getting values from the actual data source, I'm going to use the values function. So this in itself, I hope you're using this. I'm going to select a vendor here and then values, and that's going to pull up the distinct values here from my data. So if I go through here and select the values that I want and say, those are the vendors that they want to view, I would like you to notice that in the data, there's actually these trailing spaces on these values. In most cases, not all. Here, the J1 doesn't have an extra space. Just to finish off my formula, I would say then 1, else 0. And this is just going to be like a Boolean filter to be able to filter my data. So, oops, sorry. A 0 would be better. There we go. Then 1, else 0. So that would be one way, and that would be fine. However, the thing I would like you to be aware of is what happens if they go and they fix the data? Then these hard-coded values aren't going to work anymore. So I want to show you another way to prevent an issue if at some later point the data is fixed down the line. All right. If I go through and I delete those spaces and I just hard code the actual values that they want for this filter without any extra spaces. There we go. Without the spaces, you'll notice I get zeros for everything except the J1 that didn't have the trailing space. However, if I add the trim function around the vendor number, then that's going to trim off those lagging spaces and give me the correct filter that I want. This way, by including the trim function in here and then just specifying the values, now if at some future date the data is updated or fixed or cleaned up, then this formula will still work. This filter will still work with the data, whereas this filter would not work. Okay, so something to be aware of. Another scenario with these two over here, invoice number and part number, the request in the report was to remove the leading zeros. And in this case, it wasn't as easy as just say a substring function that says start on position 5 to chop off these first 4 zeros. If you'll notice, this number has 5 zeros, but down here we only have 3 zeros, and some of them have 4. So we can't use that, the substring function, as an easy way to remove them. However, combining the replace function with that trim function, we can achieve this. So the first thing I'm going to do is replace the 0 with a space. Okay, so I'll select my invoice number. Replace, and we have to specify what we want to replace. So I want to replace the 0 with a space, and I'll type that in there. All right, so this function has 2 parameters there. This is what I want to replace, and this is what I want to replace it with, and it's divided by the usual semicolon that Webi uses. Okay. So now you'll see our numbers look funny because it also eliminated the zeros in the middle as well. But don't worry, all right? The next function that I'm going to add to this is I'm going to trim off, use a left trim to remove the spaces that are on the left. So I'll add a left trim and then move to the end and a closing parenthesis. All right, that removed my spaces at the beginning. And now I'm going to go back and do another replace and replace the spaces with zeros. All right. A little convoluted, but it works. I'll replace the space with a zero. And there we go. So now our zeros are back inside our numbers, but the leading zeros are trimmed off. Okay, just some handy functions to be aware of that you can use if this is a requirement in your report. The same could be used here on your part number as well. Okay, I'm going to leave that to show the last example, but it would be the same formula. This one just happened to use, sometimes the values had letters at the beginning instead of numbers. Okay, but the same formula, the same exact formula would work for that. In fact, I could just copy that and change the value here. Change this to part number. And that does exactly what we needed to do. Okay. All right, handy functions. The last example that I want to show is displaying future data in a chart. So by default, this chart has plan and target data through the end of the month with actual values. So if I'm just going to copy this and turn it into a chart so that you can see what the default look would be without the change that I want to make. Okay, so we'll do a turn into and turn it into a combined column and line chart. Okay, and I'll spread that out. So we've got our plan and the target at the top, and then the actuals and where they're doing in relation to that. What I'd like to do, though, is to show these bars from the 11th through the 31st in gray, as well as the plan, since we're not there yet. So there can be more focus on the actuals. Okay, so that's what I want to be able to display. And I'll show you how I can achieve that. Let me move this guy over. All right. To do that, I'm going to make an extra column for both my plan and target columns. And in this new column here, I'm going to display if is null my actuals, then display plan. Okay. All right. And looks like I have these variables already in here. Let me. This is the same exact variable. I've already created it here. Plan. I did the same thing, only reverse for this variable that is going to remove, instead of is null, it's going to be if not is null. Okay, exactly the same, except we added this not null. And that is displaying plan values when we have actuals. Okay, so I've got both of those. And then we'll do the same for the target column as well. I'll insert another column on the right. This is going to be my values when, if actual is null, then target. And then I have the same over here, which is if not is null, actual, then display target. All right. The advantage to setting up your formula like this is we don't need an else statement. And so I'm not getting a 0 when I don't have values, which is important for the display of this chart. All right. Now that I have the data like this, now I'm ready to turn it into a chart. So I'm going to right click on the outer edge and turn into the same type of chart, this combined column and line chart. And then there's some fixing up that we'll need to do in here. So I want to make sure that my target values are displaying as bars, and I want to clean up, and I would create a custom legend. So I'm going to turn that off to start off with and go to my title and give it a custom title and say actuals versus plan and target. All right. So from here, I'm going to go back to the global settings, and on the measure properties, I can change which are columns and which are lines. So I'll make plan, both the plan as bars. Sorry, I want bars. If I click apply, you'll see this gives me the look that I want. Not the colors that I want though. All right. So the next step is I want to make these a little wider. By going to my value access, one of the things that I've done in similar scenarios where I needed to have an extra column in here, notice the column widths are, the bars are pretty skinny. If I chose the globally stacked chart and click apply, that does give me the wide bars. However, it actually is stacking the lines as well, which ends up putting my actuals outside of where they need to be. They need to be inside here based on their values. So if I just click stacked chart, that puts them where they want, where I want them. And in the plot area, I can make the bars a little bit better. I'll remove the spacing between the groups here, and that helps. And then I'll change the width of the bar. It's not going to go up to 0.5, but that will at least give us a little bit of extra width. All right. And then the last step I want to do here is change the color. So I'm going to right click on the orange bars there and go to format display and give it a custom color of gray, and do the same with the line chart. The pink line there, which is the future values. I'll change that and that, and I'm also going to add this dashed line. All right, there we go. So if my data changes, or as my data changes throughout the month, the actuals will be filled in, and the line will adjust and grow when the actuals are in there dynamically. So tomorrow, as new values are added in the database, the chart would be updated as well and grow as the month continues. All right, but I liked the look of that. Gives a real visual display of this is where we're at right now, and this is where we're hoping to head in the future. Okay, and that's all I had for 4.2 tricks. Any questions?
That was excellent, Roxanne. Thank you. Always good to hear those tips and trips from the trenches. Things that you come across, and then you figure out and you solve. I mean, sharing those kind of things with others is invaluable. So thank you so much. I don't see any other questions at this time. I think people are keen to get to the raffle. And see if they win that Amazon gift card. Yes, that's what I think. But thank you again, Roxanne. Excellent job. Thank you.